Welcome back to Paper Labyrinths. I'm Nick,
I'm Brendan.
and we're joined today by Grace Benfell, a games critic at the AV Club and Pace, editor at the Imaginary Engine Review, host of the Safe Room and Closet Crit podcasts, and currently writing a book on religion and Christianity in video games called Killing Our Gods. Hi, Grace.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, honestly. It's a nice sunny Sunday. It's probably cold outside, but I'm inside, so
It is really nice here today because you and I are both in the same city, which
that's
is
true. Yeah,
great for coordinating our weather conversations.
yeah. I'm regularly checking in about the weather with you.
Yes. How have you been doing lately? What have you been up to?
I don't know. I've kind of been just like farting around. I'm actually there might be some finishing touches, but the manuscript for the book is done.
Hey, congratulations.
And so I'm just working on the bibliography. I'm getting that settled up. I'm trying to bug my collaborator, who is very busy about stuff. So yeah, hopefully I think we should have like pre-orders up hopefully in the next few months.
That's great. So just to talk a little bit more about the book. So it's a collection of your column at Uppercut.
Yes.
And additional essays as well.
Yes.
On broadly Christianity and religion in games, which is a fantastic lens, I think, because it's probably under-discussed maybe
I think so.
generally.
I did get, like, shortly after I published Kickstarter, I did get reached out to by an academic who talks about some of the stuff, but it's from more of a sociological angle, like how do like gaming subcultures resemble religions and like think that sort of thing, which is very different. It's very kind of like thinking about like what theologies a game espoused or projecting my own religious hangups onto Kingdom Hearts characters and things like that.
Is there religion in Kingdom Hearts? I don't know.
There's the thing.
I'm kidding also.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's a lot of faith in Kingdom Hearts.
Yes, that is exactly the distinction I would make.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the essay. So you have an excerpt up on Mass Effect, which has a lot of maybe not like direct allegory, but certainly many parallels and many like
there's a lot of allusions as well, like scriptures quoted, things like that. Yeah.
And I kind of get the sense, I'm not a Kingdom Hearts person, but I get the sense that Kingdom Hearts is similar in that, like, well, you have like a savior and omniscient or omnipotent evil kind of thing that is being taken down, and various ways that those stories start to align. Like between Christianity specifically and Kingdom Hearts or Mass Effect or whatever.
This was also like the first column I wrote for Uppercut, I think, but it kind of is a lot about like Birth by Sleep and the way that that's about kind of troubled youth, basically. People who, are getting a little too acquainted with the dark side, right? And the way that they're like policed and sort of marginalized by this like Kingdom Hearts structure of Keyblade wielders and things. So it's all very silly, but I think it's also has this like kind of resonance with those things. And I think that's like I just think video games have this kind of existential quality because there's such an artifice to them. And there's like obviously the magic circle is bullshit, but I think there's something true that there is like a containment element. Right, there is
I've always put it as the magic circle is porous, right? So like it's not totally there, or it's not totally missing, but it's not like you get completely severanced into the game and then like your entire rest of your life melts away. It's a bit of both.
Yeah.
And so, sorry, you were saying that the magic circle, the games is like artifice or
I think there's something also about it being like a set apart space. A thing that you go to and exist in a certain context and then exit, right? And like also just there's literally games about being a god, right? Or so it can range and so I think there's just kind of like an existentialism to the form, particularly if there's some sort of modeling of a world, right? I feel like not all, but a lot of the essays in there are about RPGs. which do have some level of like simulationist logic to them, which I think lends itself to this kind of thing. But it is also just kind of about like also, people in RPGs are killing, like that's also what Mass Effect is about, right? Like Mass Effect is about there being these, eldritch kind of Lovecrafty beings beyond time that you are supposed to end. That's like the objective of the thing, right?
Yeah, who are in very literal senses responsible, even on a very long timeline, for our creation, right?
Yes, yeah.
I was thinking about this as I was rereading the Mass Effect essay last night, and thinking more about like RPGs in general as modes for faith, as the faith positioned within the protagonists, I suppose, because so many RPGs are stories of your character being told the world works in this one way, and your character saying, no, that can't be the end all be all of things. I have to look for another way. I have to find some other way to categorize the things that I see within the world, even if all of the tangible proof in front of me is telling me that that's folly, that that's hearsay. And depending on the game, depending on how your character goes about it, like in your essay, you talk about how Shepard is like the one true person who's strong enough to like unlock like a better way, simply because they are like power fantasy embodied. And certainly that is a common thing that RPGs go back to, but that is not necessarily consumptive of the entire form. But I thought it was really...
I think it's also...
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean to... I think the difference between, say, like the kind of BioWare style RPG and Final Fantasy has perhaps been overstated over the decades.
Yes.
But I do think like a key difference between them thematically is in Final Fantasy X, that's a game that is a lot about helplessness in a real way. Right. That like Yuna is a character who is going to sacrifice herself, right, to maintain the status quo. And the main character, Titus, is like out of time, has been teleported into this new world that he kind of doesn't understand, doesn't have context for, and is having to like reorient himself, right? And both those situations, like they have this affinity with each other because they both are like helpless to the circumstances that are driving them. And that, eventually they like figure out, well, Yuna figures out how to turn that, right? But I think that's sometimes a language that is kind of difficult for, I think, like for lack of a better term, the like D&D model to have, right? Especially since like in D&D, your relationship to like, if you're a paladin, it's like your god gives you power. Or no, if you're a cleric, I'm sorry. Paladins get powers from their oaths. It's a different thing. Clerics get powers from God.
Totally no religious parables there, of course.
No.
Yeah, as a forever DM, I have always sort of struggled against this idea. As more context, as a forever DM who was once the most Catholic boy alive, I have always struggled in D&D with this idea of like, okay, well, a cleric doesn't really have to have faith in the same way because they have tangible proof that their god exists.
Yeah.
Like their god has conversations with people within the world and gives them the ability to cure serious wounds in a way that even the most like diabolical foe wouldn't think, your god isn't true, that doesn't exist. Like it's just a truth about the world that those things exist. And so when people... It's always more exciting to me when people express faith in something, because to have faith in something is to believe in it without justification, without this affirmation of like, well, yeah, of course, Bahamut exists. He's over there. I could see his avatar on the battlefield.
Well, I think that's also one of the things about, I feel like FF10 is just the masterclass in dealing with a lot of this stuff in a really careful way, because the existential threat facing the sin, literally it's called, right? That exists. That's a real thing that everyone's dealing with, right? And so there's this very real, I think people characterize that game as anti-religion, and I think it's pretty unfair to it, because there's it's very sympathetic to the people who do kind of buy in, because it's like, what else are you supposed to do? Like, this works it does get rid of sin for some period of time, right?
Right.
And I don't mean, by the way, sin is like a giant, like a Godzilla monster. It's not like a...
Yeah, it can like sink your boat.
Yeah. It's not like it obviously is standing in maybe for some more existential ideas, but it is not...
it is called sin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The idea of, like, Brendan, you're saying literally being able to talk to the god feels really shot through RPGs of all kinds.
Yeah.
Like in Mass Effect, you're just fucking you spend like hours talking to whatever Dick Tentacle guy's name, and in D&D as well, like you're descendant from gods and related to gods and doing all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which, now that I'm thinking about it, I would have to sit and really think about what game models the like literal faith with no confirmation or literal representation in the like systems of the game or the narrative of the game.
Yeah, like not, this is going to sound silly, but I do think Kingdom Hearts is a good model for that, because the nature of the heart, this heaven-like place where hearts go to reside in Kingdom Hearts, that the forces of darkness are always trying to claim their power for, is never given a voice or a representation or even an agenda or something like that. It is something that you simply have to believe in and work towards without the promise of some greater reward or something like that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Kingdom Hearts is light, though. They do figure that out.
Kingdom Hearts is light. That's true. I told that to Billy Zane.
Yes, that's right.
I imagine this is not necessarily true of Kingdom Hearts, but I don't know. Is the faith aspect of that something the player grapples with, or is it just kind of part of the story and the narrative and the characters within the space?
I would say that in Birth by Sleep, I'd say there's pretty explicit grappling with it, and particularly like defying authority figures becomes kind of a central element,
right?
But I don't think Sora really does so much.
No. Sora very head empty.
Yeah.
But certainly the cast of characters around Sora, I think, like Sora in a way is like an empty vessel for you to project onto as the protagonist.
Yeah.
But it's surrounded by characters that are talking about, not necessarily
Riku,
yes.
In particular is like kind of like I had a troubled youth, but now I'm back in the church kind of guy.
With all of the fervor of an adult convert.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing is that Kingdom Hearts is like ultimately is, despite like, because I think, Brendan, you're right that it provides this model for working through some of that stuff,
right.
But it's also like terminally simplistic, even as its like lore gets increasingly convoluted and complex.
Extremely,
right?
Yeah.
It also kind of at the base level of it is Kingdom Hearts is light, and that's kind of true, operatively true, right? Like the world is good, and there are things that are difficult about the world, but you do like acclimate yourself to it ultimately, right?
Yeah, there's never really a doubt in the nature of the world. There's simply doubt in, well, what can we possibly do in the face of characters that are so much more strong than us, that have access to things that we do not ourselves have access to. And in classic RPG format, the answer to that is really just to increase your attack and magic stats until you're capable of beating them up.
Yeah. So this is exactly what I was thinking, because like thinking through in the, like let's say the D&D model is a stand-in for that kind of game. Like everything is so quantified and set down to be a game, even at the table in real life, that when you meet Ball or whatever, or in Mass Effect as well, like, oh, they have a stat block and they have numbers, and it feels like very quantified, and so the belief aspect becomes like trickier to maybe represent through these numbers, where you more or less the goal at the end of the day is like, well, I'm gonna finish the mission and do whatever,
right?
it kind of escapes, or maybe not. It, like the idea doesn't escape having so many numbers attached to it in a sense.
Yeah,
maybe that's not totally right because I'm just kind of thinking that out loud right as I'm saying it.
No, I mean I think there's definitely truth to that. I know you guys talked a little bit about Baldur's Gate 3 on a previous app, but like how much? Because I feel like Shadowheart is kind of an interesting thing to think through in this context.
Totally.
Yeah. So I fell off Baldur's Gate 3 in somewhere in Act 2, near the end of Act 2. I fell off for no good reason, really.
Well, debatably, that's like the big.
Oh, I remember exactly emotional... where I fell off. It was the Temple of Shar.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I was playing with a friend and we like walked in and we're like, oh, okay, this is going to be a whole fucking thing. Which is not like a bad thing, but
no,
it was a bit of like
it is a time investment. Yeah.
It was a hill enough that our momentum was kind of halted at that point. Which I wonder would have literally probably described what you're about to say with Shadowheart's
yeah, well, I think that is like, because the part of the thing is that, her god is real. It's just, she's just lying to her. Right.
Right.
And like, literally, kind of obscuring her memories, making her like giving her distortions of like what actually occurred to her in her past. Right. And a lot of the process of her arc is like her uncovering that like what she has been told about the world is a lie.
Yes.
But there is like a weird thing there too, where there's a beat where she, in Act 2, the spoilers for Baldur's Gate 3, I guess, but she can
you're fine.
betray her god, right? And then, but she maintains her cleric powers because like the god of the moon takes over, right? Who's like good and chill, right? And there's like a moment where she's like heartbroken and feels, like I betrayed the only thing that like I've ever known. And if I like even think about that, I'm getting my power from the god that I swore was my enemy for all my life. Like I can't think about it.
That I've been forcibly adopted by someone who I've been taught to and actively despised my entire life.
Yeah.
Just out of an act of grace, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I really wish, I understand that Baldur's Gate 3 is the game that it is, and
yeah,
I understand why they didn't do this. I think it would have been so much more interesting if there had been some sort of appeal from Saloon, the goody two-shoes god that she starts getting her powers from.
Yeah.
Of like, hey, I see that you just lost all of your powers, and it was because my sister, the god of lies, was lying to you the entire time. Hey,
how typical.
Yeah. Yeah, she does that all the time. I'm so sorry about it. Do this quest chain for me, and I'll bring you in as a cleric of my own.
Right, yeah,
I
sure.
was thinking the other direction where that happens and the game forces you to respec Shadowheart to a different class.
Yeah.
Totally.
And locks out cleric, right? Yeah, that would be... I don't know. I don't necessarily want to say that games would be better if they systematized faith. Like, I don't... that's a pretty big leap to make, and that's definitely not what I'm doing. But it does, like, I guess thinking through with RPG specifically, I would really be interested in people making that attempt, or if they have already, of course, I would love to see it.
Yeah.
RPGs so often grapple with the idea of like, oh, the world must be fixed in some way. The world is false and must be put right. And so on and so forth. And I think that when I think to experiences that feature faith or some system of belief that changes the way that your character interacts with the world in a substantive way, it's usually things that feature a lot of choice or maybe even like faction systems. Like Elden Ring features really prominently for me in this, where you exist within the world and there are different ways of going about things, whether you believe in the power of the golden path, or you believe that everything should turn to dust, or you think it's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's, different characters that exist that espouse these beliefs and represent like, oh, this is kind of the character that represents a way that you could go. And very often going those ways gets you access to a special weapon or a special attack or so on and so forth.
A door opens somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But they do also like lead you to play your character in a different way. Like you become hostile to other means of moving through the world. Other people regard you differently, and you wind up making substantive changes to the way that your character might behave in order to accommodate those ways of being, right? Like you start to prioritize different things. And even if that didn't contribute to like the end game sort of thing, which it does, I think that sort of like belief resulting in character builds or character like theory crafting is really, really satisfying to me.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's something that those games are really good at generally, is having a canvas to feel out like how you're, because the person you make in Souls stuff is so silent, right? Mm-hmm. And it has essentially no, I mean, I think the most elaboration on like backstory any of them get is in 2, and it's still like you're isekai'd into another place.
That's true,
right?
Yeah.
You're terminally ill and you're here to try and figure out a cure, and that's basically all you get, right? And so I think that there is a strong sense of like, you just have an ability to think about the way that your person relates to the world and the way that like you react to specific NPCs when they show up and their stories, right? I think there's just like a nice, like you don't really have to play with this stuff, but like if you want to really role play in Elden Ring, like you can, right? It's totally available.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the world, like they're different genres, I suppose. So this is partly it, but like the systematization of D&D kind of beckons the goal of mastery and then like undercutting and loopholing and like I'm going to reorder the world at the end of Baldur's Gate because I understand it. Whereas at the end of, like, I would probably say every Souls game, it's like, well, that happened and you were a part of it, but it's you were, maybe you were a big part of it or a little part of it, but it was not something that you could say you had a full understanding of at every moment and then executed on a plan.
Yeah.
You were part of the cycle.
A lot more, yeah. You're a lot more the foam on the wave than the power of the ocean itself.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think also those games are so concerned with like ritual, like even the loop of going back to the bonfire, right? And healing and like going on, taking the same route again, it just feels very religious in sort of a subtextual way, right?
And how the ritual changes, as like the world roughly, let's say, stays the same, but you are different with, you have bigger swords and better armor, but then the ritual stays the same. And then you have like the evolving relationship of like, oh, well, this, that one troll next under the bridge in Bloodborne first was a huge pain in the ass and then was fine. And then at a certain point, you just like breeze past him and he's just dead. Right.
Yeah.
And so that evolution is a fun, it's not purely ritualized like in a roguelike sense, but it has an arc to it, I suppose.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I love those guys. They're fun. The 2 brick trolls under the bridge.
Yeah, those guys, the brick trolls.
Spent a lot of time with them.
Oh yeah. Well, they become familiar, and that was so powerful for me in Bloodborne, because it was the first Souls game, or from, let's say, like modern From game that really clicked for me. And I so keenly felt the arc of like, oh, this city is, it's twisting, it's maze-like, I'm so confused. Every corner is some jackass with like a scythe that's going to hit me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the like arc to understanding and maybe not like total mastery, obviously, because I'm not good at them, but that was like really keenly, that was, I think, one of the first times I could really feel that progression, which I think is different from, I guess just like other run-based games or like totally resetting roguelikes and so on, which, kind of changes a little bit because Brendan and I, we've been playing CUD recently, and Joppa becomes very familiar, but that's because it's static, obviously.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that is something. I think there is kind of a like. I mean, I don't hold a lot of stock in like Dark Souls cured my depression type talking, thinking. But I do think
what about Dark Souls 2 cured your depression?
Oh well, in that case.
Yeah.
Although I kind of hard to imagine that if you're really thinking about that game at curing your depression. Pretty bleak one, even by FromSoft standards. But I just think the arc of the game, which is in some ways like a very typical video game. You get more powerful, you get more stuff, like has this kind of emotional oomph to it and power to it that I think a lot of kind of similar configurations of game like don't quite have,
Do you mean like a traditional power curve and just like, let's say the average
in like Borderlands
AAA game
or whatever?
Sure.
Like the numbers are going up, right?
No doubt.
Or even in like FF10, right? Like the numbers go up, but I don't know that you feel that like sensation of like, oh, I've really progressed, And partially because FF10 is a game that is like pretty linear. You don't really go back to old areas, or discover new things in old areas. Like you can, and there's side quests and stuff that maybe force you to do that a little bit. But I think there's a way in which like just the continuity of the world in like Bloodborne, right, creates this sensation of like you as an actor are changing in each part of it. Right. And the game loops back on itself enough that you do go back to old areas. Right. And that means that you like feel the shift. And maybe also it just helps that it's like an action game. Right. And you swing your sword and it deals more damage. It feels a little more in your body. Right. Rather than like clicking the attack button and watching the number be bigger.
I mean,
which is not to knock the approach of clicking the attack button,
That's one of my favorite buttons.
Yes,
honestly.
it's a good button. Yeah, A+ button.
Not to be, let's say, typical Morrowind person, but is it?
There we
is
go.
It just like? Yeah, no. Is it just like a the enemies don't level up with you? I mean, that's a pretty straightforward thing.
Of it. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not going to say it's everything, but it does like. That the Borderlands or whatever, and later Bethesda games flatten out in their experience because of that.
Yeah,
I think pretty dramatically.
Yeah, I think it is. It is like an important texture that when you go to a place, the things are kind of the same there as the last time you were there. Right?
I would also not say that like any game with levels or enemy scaling doesn't do like it's not a one-to-one mapping either, obviously, but I do like being annoying about Morrowind, so I'm gonna
no. Well, I also think I guess outside of FromSoft that are obviously not really doing level scaling at all, it is kind of the mode du jour, right, to some degree. I guess I don't know, how do these Assassin's Creed games work? They don't have level scaling.
I played Assassin's Creed 1, and I was like, well, this is pretty fun, and then I never played any of the other
ones.
They
never made a sequel to that one, really. So.
That's really... Well, they did recently, and I need to actually get to it.
Oh, apparently yeah, I guess that's true.
Yeah.
Nick, we have to play all of the Assassin's Creed games right away.
I'll just read a book about it.
For as much as you spend a lot of time in a given place... Assassin's Creed games are generally pretty linear, even the ones that are more open world. It's like, you can, like in Valhalla, you can really easily see, like, okay, I'm going to the 3-star area right now because I'm capable of taking on enemies that are 3 stars. Like, I've been very deliberately...
very much after The Witcher 3, I think, which has a similar, like, it is kind of hub-based, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and, like, thinking about like the production of putting that sort of thing together, it is obviously a lot cheaper from a production standpoint to take same guy with sword and give him a red hat instead of a blue and say he's level 15 now and you have to fight him, as opposed to something more like a Bloodborne or something like that, where I go into the place and like, oh, the dogs have crow heads now, and that is terrifying to me.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's also hard from a design point of view, because it's the more you leave, like thinking through like ritual making, right? The more you leave that in the player's hands, I think generally the less players like it, right? Like this is very broadly speaking, right? But the one of the many difficulties of a Souls game from a player point of view is like, well, you just kind of have to figure it out, right? Like this, you're going to be repeating yourself, but how you do this is more up to you. And that kind of like, but what do I do? How am I, when am I satisfied kind of thing is a difficult question to answer, right? And that's sometimes just not something you want to put up with when you're just playing a game to relax or whatever, which is fine.
I think there's a gradient there. Like all three of us immediately grabbed onto the idea of like the two trolls under the bridge in Bloodborne, where you go revisit them because they're a good place to stock up on blood vials, because they always drop blood vials, and usually in multiples, which you run out of even in the late game. And so it's good to be able to go back there. And what I think is so striking about that is a ritual that people will usually come to on their own or because a friend told them to. And it is an example of a ritual that is very clearly designed to be discovered, right? It was a conscious choice by the designers to go, okay, we're going to put a couple of beginning of the game really tough guys right here that you're probably going to run straight past, because otherwise you're going to get killed in one hit flat. And, thinking about that first Yharnam area, they're very close to the end of that space. I think they're basically at the lamp that is the run back for Gascoigne. That's it. And so at the very early game, you're probably very likely to be like, well, there's two of them there. I'm not going to mess with that. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And people will discover like, oh, that's right. Those guys are right there. They're right next to the lamp. I'll go back to them. I could probably take them easy at this point. And so I think there's definitely a degree, and this is done throughout, from games especially, but certainly in other considered games, where people are thinking of, okay, what are the rituals that we want people to discover? What do we want them to spend time doing? And how do we accommodate that through, level design and encounter design?
Yeah, and I think there is like, I feel like people really discovered this with UFO 50 last year, that there is just a lot of, which is kind of not comparison, I guess, but like there's a lot of joy in intuition, in like learning something for yourself and not having someone tell you it, right?
Yeah.
I think that is like, and I think that's also something that I'm about to sound like a twat, but I think that's something that is nice about late From. Although I think this is also, I'm sure this is actually also true in Kingsfield and Shadow Tower and stuff that I really would like to play but haven't gotten around to yet.
Yeah, me too.
That, those games are kind of literary in a sense of like there is this presentation of a text and it's not really telling you a lot about what you were supposed to think about how the world operates, right? And it is like through this process of like reading and making connections, right, that you build this like network of meaning. And that is like, it's a really nice and almost like fundamentally human feeling, I think, that games are not always the best at cultivating, right? And I don't think it's necessarily like you have to tell stories in the way that Dark Souls does to be good.
Sure.
Right. And I am also a fan of like very talky. Yeah. I really like Final Fantasy, right? Which are, kind of notoriously
chatty.
Chatty. Yeah. I like Hideo Kojima also mostly.
Yeah.
So, but I think that there is something about like the interpretive space, valuing the interpretive space, and that those are games that value that space on both a like playing the game and way you do encounters, and also on like a more meta, like general level. That like, this is like the moment that people talk about all the time, but like when you go after you leave the asylum in Dark Souls and the guys there, it's like, oh, actually there's two bells of awakening. You have to like think, that forces you to like make an interpretive move about the world, right?
Yeah.
You have to like, wait, what is my relationship to this now? Like you have to start thinking about it. And that's really, it's nice, to be put in that kind of position. I think that's also something, I've never played Morrowind to my shame, but like, I feel like more particularly in the kind of religion stuff, like does also kind of force you to do that, to think about like what your relationship is to the world, and also that contextually changes or not depending on like whether you're a dark elf or not, or various things, right? Like what does it mean for you to be this kind of person and to like mold yourself into that? I feel like it's a very literary question. And that's like a question that's like fundamental to like the last temptation of Christ, right? Like, what does it mean to be this thing? And how do I even make myself become like the son of God? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right.
No, I mean, Morrowind operates on that in multiple ways. Like, certainly, like the first choice you make being which fantasy race are you? Mm-hmm. Everyone is immediately like, oh, I see. So you're an Argonian. You're a Dunmer, but you're not from here, so we don't like you anyway. Really does. I think it goes beyond the like, oh, we're gonna like reflect the player choice back at them in the conversation. It really does start to get commented on by the characters in a way that is like, well, wait a minute, why is our savior, somebody not from here or whatever? Because I guess if you the plot of Morrowind is, hey, you go kill God.
Yes, yeah.
So it's definitely doing that. And then, I mean, separately, like the way one of my favorite ways of Morrowind allowing your interpretation is way down on the level of like interacting with the quests and things, right? Because you don't, you get a map, and then like when you get a quest, it's like, hey, we'll go to this river, then make a right, and then go to the fort, and then in that fort is somebody, talk to him and he'll tell you what to do. Really does. And then you just let to your own devices, right? That is, maybe a smaller act of interpretation, but it does kind of remove the player from the like pure mechanics of the game, and does force them to say like, well, is this fork in the road the one that was meant, or was it this other one, or what is going on, which is like very closely in conversation of the writer and the person who lays out the world. And even some forks in the road have like diegetic signs that point you in one way or the other, and some don't, and all those kinds of things make room for the player to bring more of themselves into the experience beyond just guy with the red hat is level 15 and it's going to be hard or whatever.
Right. Yeah, totally. No, I mean, I think I just think it's interesting to think about. And I think it's also I think it's an interesting game where the power fantasy is so clear, but it is also like kind of complicated and weird, right? Which is, I think, what you want from something like that.
Yeah. I think I want that. I think all three of us want that. Yeah. And then a lot of people probably don't. From a like commercial point of view, I don't know, but Elden Ring is obviously it sold a few copies, so
yeah.
Maybe that's not totally true.
It is kind of weird though, because I do think that, I mean, something like Pathologic 2, right, is always going to be to some degree marginal. It has its shooters, right, but like it is something that like people cannot, even people who really like it. Like I have friends who really like it who are just like, I cannot be asked to like engage with the survival mechanics of that game. Like I'm not doing it, and which is like fine. Like the game allows you to not do that. I don't see any reason why people should subject themselves to something they don't enjoy. Right. But I also think, I do think that I am I think in terms of, well, I don't know if this is like a different friction in terms of like, sometimes as a person who plays games, I do just want to chill out and like listen to a podcast or whatever. But like in terms of like thinking about something, I do want it to be kind of friction forward, right?
That's probably one of the like primary ways you do get people to think about things is to put friction in front of them. Yeah. And even like the tiniest thing can be like an interesting decision point. I've been playing Star Wars Outlaws every once in a while. Mm-hmm. And every so often I get the feeling like, I'm going to go do like these quests before I keep going, just to like get this one thing and then come back to it. And it's like a very self-directed set of decisions, which is nice, right? It's otherwise it's like it completely goes down smooth kind of experience, which is what the goal is.
For sure.
Except for these like tiny little bumps where you're like, actually, I'm going to do something different.
Yeah.
Which I really appreciate, frankly, but that's obviously my taste.
Yeah. No, I think it is, there's always kind of spaces where that stuff, I mean, I think it's also just, I mean, I'm not like a the library from Halo Combat Evolved apologist. But like people remember that. People know what that is. You have like a sensory experience relating
I don't remember
to
anything before or after the library, but I could very vividly remember.
You remember the silent cartographer.
Yeah.
Because you go on the beach.
No, sorry. I mean, like the spaces before and after, like the valleys and the the various like, oh, this little base that has some guys in it that we're just going to shoot up. Like none of that stuck.
Right.
But the like specific, the silent cartographer and all that kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because there were massive pains in the ass.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think that's just the association is strong. I think that's why every Dark Souls has a swamp level.
I was gonna say, yeah.
You just simply forget the whole thing if it didn't.
Yeah, that's right. It's totally unmemorable without that.
Yeah, like I, for my sins, have not finished Combat Evolved, and so I don't know the resonance there, but that seems very like, oh yeah, Blighttown, the Blighttown of Halo Combat Evolved.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. It is, I think, literally pretty much that.
Yeah. I would prefer Blight. If you were to be like, you have to play through the library or Blighttown, I'm going Blighttown. But I think also I just think Blighttown is like cool as like the like horrible disease shanty town that's like inside the mountain where the city of the gods is like, This is what I want from video games.
Exactly.
I don't play, I don't know how related this is, but I don't typically play many horror games, but I kind of associate those types of friction with horror game friction, where it's just like, I don't want to say annoying because that sounds way more pejorative than it is, but like,
it's constrained for a very deliberate reason.
Sure. No, go ahead.
No, you finish what you were saying.
Well, I was going to say, like, I have tried so many times to play Alien Isolation, and after a certain point, my like frustration just overwhelms the parts of my brain getting tickled by seeing alien things, right? And I don't know if it's 1-to-1, but that's sort of how they overlap in my head.
Right.
I mean, I think this is kind of my because I feel like people overstate how stodgy and difficult to deal with like Silent Hill 2 is. Like it is still, I think, a pretty slick video game, right?
Like it's old, but also, you could still play it in a way.
It's short. Also, it's like it goes down easy, and I think, but at the same time, there is this like, you can't really run very fast. You're walking everywhere. If you're trying to conserve ammo, which you don't necessarily need to a ton, but you do need to a little bit, right? You're whacking enemies with this metal pipe and it takes forever.
It takes forever. It's a bad idea to get started.
Right. And so I think there is this kind of fundamental, like, to me, and I think Silent Hill 2, this especially feels kind of like core to the thematic thing in that game, that there is this kind of like brutality to moving through. And it's not necessarily hard, but it just takes time and is kind of slow. And that sensation of like, it kind of is like you're wading through corpses, right?
Yeah.
Like it just, this sensation of like moving through the world, and the so much violence in video games is easy, it's fast, it's quick, right? Headshots. And this is like the complete opposite of that, where everything is sort of molasses, right? And I don't mean to say like that makes it sound like more of a pain than it is, because again, like it is kind of easy to get into once you have the swing of it, right? But there is just this like slowness that I think forces you to like think about the environments you're in, look at the world, like it gives you headspace to think about things. And I think that's like, I mean, one of many problems with the remake is that I think
this is exactly what I was going to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that friction is kind of sanded off. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like thinking about friction and thinking about Blighttown in particular, like the first time you run into Blighttown, you're going to get absolutely murdered by guys with blow darts or just falling from a great height or something like that.
Yeah.
But it is.
Well, and there's also there's all those like pockets of like, because in a lot of the height deaths in Dark Souls are just like a death box.
Yes, exactly. There's places
so
where
you can fall off the wrong way, and that you shouldn't die, but you do.
Exactly.
Right?
And so it really forces you to pay attention to the environment in a way that's like, okay, even more than other places, I need to be sure of sound footing and aware of what's going on around me in a way that is very resonant of something like Silent Hill 2 original.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this idea of friction, of how these older experiences of horror that were like really trying to do something or make something that felt considered in a particular way of, in that era, all feature that different kind of friction, whether it's the controls or camera angles or just an uncertainty about what it is that you're supposed to do or where you're supposed to go or how to solve a given puzzle. And it's been really dispiriting to see like remake after remake that have basically turned all of them into the exact same game. Like I played Resident Evil 4 and Dead Space remakes back to back, and I loved both of them, but they were basically the exact same game, just with like different protagonists in the driver's seat.
No, and I think the thing is that it is like, I do like that model. Like I liked Dead Space. I mean, I did write like a kind of mixed review of Dead Space remake for Paste, but like that game, both, I mean, the original and that are just on a fundamental level are like really nice to play.
Totally.
Right, they feel really good. And I think there's been this trend in like kind of indie space with stuff like Signalis and Crow Country, where you get, because even like, especially like Silent Hill is pretty sparse.
Yeah.
You get this like paring down, and so it's like this almost very puzzle boxy kind of feeling, which actually I really like. Like I loved Crow Country a lot, and part of it is kind of twee and mini, but has this sort of haunted quality for that.
It has a feeling of being very consumable. You know what I mean? Like it feels like something where if I sit down with it, I feel like, oh, okay, I have a mental picture of how long it's going to take me to get through this place that I appreciate, even if what is going on with it does not resonate with me as strongly as the things that it's in conversation with. I at least have like a perspective of it. No, I mean, it's no
Silent Hill 2, but it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing also that I think is nice about that is that it is also a game about, like, it's in a theme park. It's about nostalgia in a really direct way, about like wanting to return to something that didn't exist and like damning the future to do that. And that, I think, plays thematically with it being this throwback that also is so like pared down and literally toy-like, right? So, I think it's really thinking through some of that stuff. But I just agree that like, I do think that, I mean, I said this in my, like, the thing I wrote for AV Club about Silent Hill 2 Remake, but just that it, like, I feel like you play Silent Hill 2 and you feel the way that, like, oh, video games can be anything. Like, they can do this. They can, like, tell just, like, an adult story.
Right, yeah.
In, like, a really straightforward way, right? And it just feels now it feels so hard to get games, especially at that, like, kind of budget and scale, that really do that, I think the exception to this maybe is that Alan Wake 2 is a game that has all the set dressing of a survival horror game of this lineage, right? And it has the over-the-shoulder camera, and you can directly compare it to like RE4 or Dead Space Remake, right?
Right.
But it is also like interested in other things, and all that stuff is sort of like, okay, that's the set. And now here's the idea. The idea is something else, right?
Yeah, it dares to imagine, like, okay, here's the form. What else can we do with this apart from, like, let's take that story and put it into this form and people will buy that.
Yes, totally. It's very, I feel like it's, the big ideas in the game are, like, are not backgrounded, but are, like, different from, like, this is how you engage with, inventory management and firing your gun at little Zambo guys, right?
Yeah.
But I just think it's a shame because I do think that, and it's hard. I think increasingly, like, everyone's having trouble getting funding.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
all these things are really difficult, and so I do think it's tough to kind of like, hey, what is a new, like, how do we make horror games that interface in a new way?
Mm-hmm. Right? I don't begrudge anyone making the decision. Like, I think everyone, or at least the three of us, certainly understand the logic of Silent Hill, the remake of Silent Hill 2 doing what it does.
Yeah.
it's hard.
No, for sure.
It's just simply hard. Yeah.
I also want to ship games and make money on the back of them. So I get it.
Would be pretty good. Yeah, generally.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Grace, have you ever played Dread? The tabletop game.
The tabletop game. No, I haven't. I have played 10 Candles, actually, which you talked about.
Oh, you should talk about 10 Candles then.
I mean, it was with a friend that I'm no longer friends with.
Oh, okay. Well,
no, it's fine. It's fine.
To segue in, actually, this is another interesting bit of tabletop tension that I'd forgotten and had been reminded about. I was talking with my friend Bird about another falling block puzzle game called Starcrossed by Alex Roberts, which is a 2-player game of will they, won't they, that uses a falling tower block.
Totally. I've heard of this.
And it's you play as 2 people who are on the verge of acting on their feelings, and the tower falling is taken as representation of that, however that might be. And so when you're interacting with someone, when you're feeling them out, when you're trying to figure out are they into me? How do I feel about them? And you're pulling blocks, it represents this the tension of a potential relationship or a potential
vulnerability
moment. Exactly. And one of the things this is the mechanic that I'd forgotten about, which is in order to talk to someone, your hand must be on the tower.
Oh,
which I think is great.
Cool.
It represents you must put yourself in a vulnerable position in order to communicate directly. Because otherwise it's not part of the game.
Yeah,
otherwise it doesn't add to that tension.
Yeah, it's free in a bad way. Yeah. That's pretty clever. I like that quite a bit.
Yeah,
that's cool. And I'm realizing when you said Dread, Nick, I was I don't know if I know what that is, but now I know.
Yes,
that it's the horror game where you play Jenga. Yeah,
it's the Jenga horror game. Yeah. I've probably played more tabletop horror games than I have video game horror.
I mean, it's easier to manage. You have a little more control over the experience.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's really interesting. I think this is something. I mean, I know that we were I just think about relationship stuff in games a lot because I think it's tricky, and I think in some ways it's written, if not badly about, I think there is kind of some level. I remember seeing a review of one of the Metro games years and years ago that was mad about how whenever you go to a station, it's just a panorama of conversations you're supposed to eavesdrop on. And I'm what
was the desire? What was
what do you want it to be? I don't know. It's fake. It's not real. You can't go there. And
the whole point of the game is you can't be there. That's the thesis of the Metro games is you got to be out in the world, and it sucks.
Yeah. So it felt I felt very weird. I feel like there was some games criticism that is just being mad at the artifice. And so I sometimes think the way people talk about romance in games can be a little bit poisoned by this.
This fucking Magic Circle, I hate it so much.
Yeah. Well, just that it's right. Well, that it's it's not, it can't be a real romantic relationship with someone.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way. And I think that you can play with things like that in an interesting way for sure. And I think that the tower thing that you talked about is really interesting. That, I think there is so little. I would love to have more ways in video games of modeling or thinking about vulnerability, of there being a cost to you doing something.
Right.
Socially.
Yeah.
Right. That is thornier than just your reputation going down.
I mean,
or whatever.
I think even something, right. That's literally what I was going to say is I think the idea of I have to put my hand on a Jenga tower to talk to my partner is 100 times more powerful and evocative, and it makes you aware of your own body than any I don't want to say any, but very many, most of the relationship scenes in a video game, right? Which is not to take away from the enjoyment people get out of those, but it's hard to really get people to cross that bridge over. And I think I think the people that get a lot out of those kinds of engagements are willing to author a story alongside the game, right? And are willing to say or they're willing to role play, or they're willing to write fanfic, or willing to be vulnerable in a way that is not required necessarily to complete the game. And maybe that's what about the idea of touching a Jenga tower is like, well, you have to do this, right? That it is required, and it feels to me, to my specific taste, more powerful.
No, I mean, I was like very excited at that idea because I think it's true. Like, I think, you know, relationship building of any kind is dealing with and negotiating with your own vulnerability and like how much you want to share with someone else, what that looks like. And, you know, and it can go bad. It often does go bad.
Yeah.
Right. And so that, I think that is like a sensation that, yeah, it's just hard to capture, I think, particularly when our engagement is kind of power fantasy level. And I do think that like the romances in games that I really like Titus and Yuna, for example, and also like V and Judy in Cyberpunk 2077, I think kind of start out from a position where there are two fairly well realized characters to begin with, right? And it is a little bit more about watching a writer write two people falling in love than like there being a system of engagement, right? With that.
No, that makes sense. It feels more like reading literature as opposed to playing.
Which is not a knock, and I actually do kind of like the thing in Cyberpunk where like you can call Judy and she'll come over to your apartment, and like she's just like there. And you would just like drink with her or whatever, right? Like
probably more realistic than most games in as far as like what a relationship actually is, which is like it's like being in the same space as you.
Right. Know? Yeah. Well, it's also like, you know, I'm sure people are like, oh, there's no new dialogue or whatever, right? Like getting mad at the artifice again.
Where's my content?
Yes. Yeah. But I think there is a niceness too that like even if you're like not. Even if there's not new stuff happening in the relationship, right? You have the feeling of like, anytime I can call her up and she'll be there, and there's a sense of that routine. Like, I think whether or not you even engage in that system, like having the knowledge that it's there, I think is like a nice touch.
I think likewise, and sometimes this is just a consideration you have to establish when you start creating the thing. Sometimes it's a budget thing, but like... having characters, you know, you were talking about characters that are like fully realized people, or at least that are like more rounded and written in a way above and beyond. Like, I'm the brown haired one. I'm the one that doesn't like aliens, etc., etc.
Right. Yeah,
that's me.
You know, having characters that observe and react to the decisions you're making as part of the game is really, really important, I think, for making those relationships feel real. You know, I was thinking before when you brought up Pathologic 2 of the way that you have such a limited amount of time and resources in that game that really constricts your action economy in an interesting way. And because of that restricts like the number of favors that you can do for people or the people that you can talk to before the thing progresses, et cetera, et cetera. And so you will, just by virtue of the fact that you can't go around and do everything, wind up becoming friends with some people and not friends with others. And they will react to you doing particular things like harvesting organs or working on the cure as opposed to working on making yourself rich and powerful within the tiny ecosystem of this terrible little town. You know, people will have... People are not merely boxes for you to go talk to. They have senses and they have reports and they have ideas of what's going on. Go ahead. There's
so many characters, especially in the early part of that game, where you're like, oh yeah, this is my friend. Like, or my friend way back, but you've been gone forever, and you go talk to them and they're like, I fucking hate you.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? Yeah. Like, what did I do? Like, I haven't been here. I just got back. My dad is dead, and this is the way you're talking to me. Like, what is happening?
I just started the game. What's the deal?
Right, and that being like, I think it's actually, this is like a weird pull. I think it's something that Dragon Age Origin does well in terms of, not really in terms of like player-character relations, but like inter-party relationships.
Right.
That like you never really get to the point where like Alistair and Morgan just get along and they're chill.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. They're
like every conversation they have is a little bit.
I'm sorry, I was stepping on you. Go ahead.
No, please go.
I was going to say their starting positions are simply too opposed because of the way the politics of the world works. Like, that's just not in the cards.
Yeah, and I think that's like a really nice feeling that I think it's like really rough that I think buy. I mean, I haven't played the Veilguard. I probably will at some point, but it seems to be completely sanded off by that point.
Yeah, can't wait.
That's unfortunate.
And I think, Pathologic 2 is just really good at and there's you being sort of drawn then to characters who treat you nicely, right? In a way that you would be drawn to that in real life, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
I love it when people are nice to me.
Yeah.
When I'm playing Pentiment, I don't want to hang out with all the monks that are like, you're an idiot, Andreas Mahler, right? Like you're a foolish artist. Like I'm gonna go with the townspeople who have, the food is worse, but they're more nice to be around.
I like, I'm forgetting the monk who's like a real jerk to you, who's also like drawing with you at the beginning of the game.
He's the tonsure, I think, right?
Yeah. Well, and then he's one of the suspects in the second act.
Yeah, I think I probably accused him.
But it's like I never learned that he was like smuggling church money to Jews.
That's right.
I didn't know that.
We were
either.
too mad at each other, and he was the guy I like pinned the murder on, right? And like if I'd known that, I would have played that differently.
Sure. Uh-huh.
But like the fact of there being this like we hate each other. We're beefing, and so like I just don't learn these things about you because
that rules.
Yeah, well, I think it's fun. Yeah. It's like it feels a bit more opposed to the there's not a romantic relationship in the game, but the player sexual kind of like, well, everyone could be your friend or your enemy kind of thing. Like it is more fun to be like, well, this guy is just an asshole, and he's always gonna be an asshole, and there's nuance there. That's the character of the story being told. There's no reason.
Yeah.
It would be less interesting if everyone could occupy any point of like relationship with the player.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is just part of what makes Pentiment the GOAT.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Is that I think it, and even more, because people talk about like Kentucky Route Zero, for example, that like you don't really make that many choices in that game, and it's mostly like sort of a poetic interpretation. But I really like the Pentiment approaches it in some ways a similar way, but it's almost like you really do have to think about like who is Andreas and like how does he relate to the world and what does that mean for how he will act, right? There's so much like interpretive power in those things that I think that really gives it heft and a weight to it, like making these kinds of decisions in a way that, I don't know, it's easy for that stuff to feel cheap, right? And it really doesn't. It feels so impactful, even though like the narrative of the game hardly changes at all, right? From choice to choice. It just is this like, yeah, what do you want your life to mean?
Yeah.
And what does that mean about how you present the world? And like, how do those intentions actually match up with what occurs?
Yeah.
Right. Is like a real thing, real friction.
It becomes less of the like, the player gets to tell their own story and make all their own decisions. And they have their own like, personalized like Mass Effect, let's say, style of story, which obviously is pretty constrained in many ways.
Yeah, it's kind of a lie, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But
choices matter.
That's yes, yeah. It's less of that, and it is more of a distinct story. Let's say we're playing within the bounds of marketing here, but like it's more of a distinct story. But there's a lot more room for interpretation because there, in the let's say the choices matter model, right? It's just A to B, like the player does the thing and that's it. Where in Pentiment and Pathologic, like you do things, yes, but it is there's more inertia and history and like less that the player can decide, but that means there's more room for, I think, interpreting things that you had no part in, and that can also be very powerful. And I've compared my playthroughs of Pentiment with other people, and aside from just like, I did not know that one monk was funneling money. Aside from those things, I still had my like, well, I truly do think like this is my interpretation of these events. And the other person, having another player, having seen different things, but also made different choices and make different interpretations, I feel like is a stronger and more interesting kind of quote unquote player story. But it does ask more of people, right? Like it is, if you're going to go that deep, you do need to put more of yourself into it to try and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I think really the thing that is like, especially someone who now I've like, well, I was kind of a forever DM for a while, and then in the like last year or so, I've been playing a Blades game with some friends, and really like there is no computer RPG on Earth that can match the like making a guy and watching your guy do shit.
Yeah.
Of like a good tabletop group. Like you just cannot compete, right? And so I do think that like, and I think it's actually something that Baldur's Gate 3, at least if you do the Dark Urge stuff, is kind of good at of like having, there's like is a history here that you sort of have to engage with and figure out how you contextualize stuff in relationship to, and it ends up being kind of simplistic in some ways, right? But like it's totally there. It really works, I think. And like, so, you know, but yeah, I just agree that like, I do think that, the interpretive experience is like the more powerful thing. And it's what is so much more available to you than the feeling of like, I'm making a person who's like changing the way the world works, right? Which you can just, even in something that's like very combat focused, like D&D or whatever, you can do way easier.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of those choices matter games are inevitably, or many of them will be like, oh, now you go and kill God.
Now you choose green beam, red beam, blue beam.
Yeah, like you're gonna kill God with a gun or a sword. It's up to you.
Yeah,
$79.99.
That's right. I mean, Morrowind is one of those. So like, I'm not. Don't get me wrong.
Well,
like,
but to that point, like people talk way more about like, oh yeah, I got in really deep with the vampires and spent a lot of time like interacting with them in an interesting way than I ever have people talking about like the plot of Morrowind, you know?
Yeah,
like, it's like people whether they realize it or not, people are interested in getting attached to things and or particularly characters, right? People, things within the world that are like that relate to them in some way. Like one of my favorite moves as a GM to do is like to introduce a character and then say to a player like, oh, you have a bad relationship with this person. Why is that?
Yeah.
Because that immediately like ties them to them in a you know, again, using friction. Like you have a relationship to this person and it is maybe not hostile, but it's something that needs work. And
it's not a default, like, you know, generally
hello,
pleasant.
traveler.
Yeah, like we're gonna keep this game going kind of relationship, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's also something that Blades has, that thing where you choose your contacts at once, like friendly, and one's like a rival.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Which is really lovely. Yeah, that there's like you have to pick a character that you have like some kind of negative affiliation with.
Totally. It's good.
It's good. Well, I think we can probably start wrapping up. Grace and Brendan, do you have any last loose thoughts?
I just think about, I'm just rotating Judy from Cyberpunk in my mind again.
I need to replay it so I can get back to, because I think I played it before the big update and then I sort of fell off and I don't think I met Judy and I've only heard good things about that story.
I've never played it, yeah.
I am so curious because like I do feel like just playing, because I bought the game well after update stuff, and so I feel like I have like a distorted map of what that game, because I kind of like sometimes read crit from 2020, like negative crit about the game, and I'm just like, that's just not true. Like people are just saying things that are false, right? You know, like I don't know.
Charlie Brown does have hoes. They're right there.
But also I'm playing a game that like I like the way it feels when I press the trigger and fire a gun in.
Yeah.
And that does like it changes the whole thing. Like I feel like if it's miserable, then you're never way less likely to be charitable to something else that the game is doing, right?
Absolutely.
So, you know. Because I think I posted about like, you know, 5 years too late. But I was like, I don't know, it's weird that like Hades has like one woman who looks like she's over 40 and she's like a bitch hag. And Cyberpunk has all these women who are who are middle-aged or older, right? And are just like, none of them are mothers or grandmas, right? They're all just like people moving in the world, same as you. And it felt like, I was just like, this is such like a basic gender thing that like no game does,
Yeah.
You know, like no video games have women that are older than 50, right? Who are like agents in the world. It just doesn't happen.
This is
right?
This is Kreia Erasure, and
right. Oh yeah, Kreia is a really good example. Yeah. No, I mean I'm not saying it never happens. It's just rare.
Of course. Look, I saw the fruit and I picked it from the branch, and that's it.
Yeah. No, you gotta do it. I've actually never played KOTOR 2 all the way through, which feels like
I would be fascinated to hear what you think about it, because I replayed it recently and I had not a great time with it, but more from a game point of view and less on the story side of things. So.
Yeah. I was playing KOTOR 1 again, and then Baldur's Gate 3 came out.
Sure.
So it kind of obliterated that. But I'll get to it at some point.
You would love
Kreia.
Is all
for like 13-year-old me who was so excited about KOTOR 2, and then it didn't come out on Mac, and I was like devastated.
Right.
Oh yeah. Been there.
So, yeah.
Grace, where can people find you on the internet? What should people be paying attention to?
Well, there's lots of. Nick did a really good job of shouting out all my stuff. So I have a website, graceinthemachine.com. And there's like links to a bunch of stuff. I have a Blue Sky, which is just Grace Machine at bluesky.social or whatever it is. At bisky.social. I also have another website that co-edit called The Imaginary Engine Review. It's just tier, TIER -review.com. We have an issue coming soon about the minuscule budget Disco Elysium-like Lovely Lady RPG, which I think will be some interesting reads. I'm hoping it'll be good.
Yeah, to pitch tier real quick, you do like monthly like runs of articles on one game, but they're all like very, very indie, just small, like way under notice. Like I don't think I've ever heard of a game before it hit tier. So I appreciate it for that.
Yeah, that's the idea. We've been moving a little more slowly than one issue a month, as it tends to go, maybe.
Yeah.
But yes, that's essentially the idea, and it's kind of bullet points, but for indies, and not when I say indies, I don't mean like Hades 2 or like a big, and it's no shade to those games necessarily, but it's just that's not what we're talking about, right?
Yes. We live in the AAA indie era.
Yes. Yeah. And so the idea is to, because I feel like indie crit. It's just hard. It's hard for people to want to read about something that they haven't played. I think this is just a fundamental trick,
absolutely,
or difficulty that faces game criticism across.
Yeah, or
everything.
Something that is like not immediately recognizable, because like you look at a Hades, I guess, and you're like, oh, okay, great. Like I can put all those pieces together in my head and I understand what it is.
Yeah, and so the idea is to just kind of have like a small, hopefully long-lasting, like sustainable space where people can write about these kinds of things. And I guess also I'm still learning lessons and taking knocks running this thing, but like also I have been involved in like the ground floor of a lot of these kinds of websites that have inevitably fallen apart or never or crashed at launch, essentially, like never got off the ground really. And so it's trying to like learn lessons from some of that stuff. And like, but yeah, I don't know. We did an issue on, Pistol Show, which is a RPG Maker game from the late 2000s, like 2008, 2009, which is maybe just one of the most interesting and like provocative games ever made. It's this kind of, I don't even know how to describe it. This like sprawling musical, like Death Dream haze about this
you're like an assassin but also being pursued by assassins, and
there's
a lot of gender in it.
There's so much gender. It's also a metaphor for sex work, kind of. There's all this, it's got a lot going on, and so and we just I think had like a really good lineup of people writing really interesting things about it. So yeah, I mean that's basically the thing. I also do God, I feel insane every time I'm on guest on a podcast, and then I either like forget a thing that I'm doing, or like I'm like, it's so long, I'm doing too much stuff.
You do a lot of stuff is the thing.
Yeah. I also do a podcast with my friend Rose called The Safe Room, where we talk about mostly survival horror, but also just like horror adjacent games. The last episode we did was on Indica, which is, speaking of games about religion, it's a nun game. You play as a nun. That game's good as hell.
Yeah,
I think we had a really good discussion about it.
Really need to play Indica.
I think you'll dig it. It's really cool.
Probably good.
Yeah. And and there's also like we have a Patreon, and there's Closet Crit, which Nick mentioned is a kind of dormant show. I need to text my friend Sophie Blair about it and get that rolling again. But we read like short essays, kind of philosophical texts, and then I just up yapping about whatever because we're really good friends and it's easy for us to talk. I think that's, and also, I'm a freelance writer. I write all over the internet. You can see that on Blue Sky and stuff. And also, if you're an editor and you're listening to this, give me a call. Give me a ring. Let me know.
And if people want to pre-order Killing Our Gods, your book on religion and Christianity.
The pre-order page is not up yet, so I'm afraid I don't have a place to
just follow your Blue Sky for updates.
Yeah, it'll come. Okay. It'll happen.
Awesome.
My collaborator is GinaFowler.com, GinaFowler.com, and she's like a collaboration section, and there you can find some info about it. I think there's a link to the Kickstarter. I mean, it's now closed, right? But if you want some information, and then also that will be where this stuff gets posted eventually. So,
and the great excerpt on Mass Effect on your website.
Yes, yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that will be it. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Grace.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming through.
Of course. Really enjoyed it.